The Count of Monte Cristo is an adventure novel by French author Alexandre Dumas completed in 1844. It is one of the author's most popular works, along with The Three Musketeers. Like many of his novels, it is expanded from plot outlines suggested by his collaborating ghostwriter Auguste Maquet. The story takes place in France, Italy and islands in the Mediterranean during the historical events of 1815–1838. It begins from just before the Hundred Days period and spans through to the reign of Louis-Philippe of France. The historical setting is a fundamental element of the book. An adventure story primarily concerned with themes of hope, justice, vengeance, mercy and forgiveness, it focuses on a man who is wrongfully imprisoned, escapes from jail, acquires a fortune and sets about getting revenge on those responsible for his imprisonment. However, his plans have devastating consequences for the innocent as well as the guilty. In addition, it is a story that involves romance, loyalty, betrayal and selfishness, shown throughout the story as characters slowly reveal their true inner nature. The book is considered a literary classic today. According to Luc Santi, The Count of Monte Cristo has become a fixture of Western civilization's literature, as inescapable and immediately identifiable as Mickey Mouse, Noah's Flood, and the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Background to the plot: Dumas wrote that the idea of revenge in The Count of Monte Cristo came from a story in a book compiled by Jacques Puchet, a French police archivist, published in 1838 after the death of the author. Dumas included this essay in one of the editions from 1846. Puchet told of a shoemaker, Pierre Picaud, living in Nard registered trademark Metz in 1807, who was engaged to marry a rich woman when three jealous friends falsely accused him of being a spy for England. Picaud was placed under a form of house arrest in the Fenestrelle fort, where he served as a servant to a rich Italian cleric. When the man died, he left his fortune to Picaud, whom he had begun to treat as a son. Picaud then spent years plotting his revenge on the three men who were responsible for his misfortune. He stabbed the first with a dagger on which were printed the words "Number 1", and then he poisoned the second. The third man's son he lured into crime and his daughter into prostitution, finally stabbing the man himself. This third man, named Lupin, had married Picaud's fiancée copyrightee while Picaud was under arrest. In another of the true stories, Puchet describes a poisoning in a family. This story, also quoted in the Pléiade edition, has obviously served as model for the chapter of the murders inside the Villefort family. The introduction to the Pléiade edition mentions other sources from real life. The Abbe copyright Ferrier existed and died in 1819 after a life with much resemblance to that of the Ferrier in the novel. As for Dantes, his fate is quite different from his model in Puchet's book, since the latter is murdered by the Quai de Ruse of the plot. But Dantes has alter egos in two other Dumas works. In Pauline from 1838, and more significantly in Georges from 1843, where a young man with black ancestry is preparing a revenge against white people who had humiliated him. Plot summary: Edmond Dantes. In 1815 Edmond Dantes, a young and successful merchant sailor who has just recently been granted the succession of his erstwhile captain Leclerc, returns to Marseille to marry his Catalan fiancée copyright Emerca copyright Dantes. Leclerc, a supporter of the exiled Napoleon copyright on I, found himself dying at sea and charged Dantes to deliver two objects, a package to Marshal Bertrand, and a letter from Elba to an unknown man in Paris. On the eve of his wedding to Merca copyright Dantes, Fernand is given subtle advice by Dantes' colleague Danglars, to send an anonymous note accusing Dantes of being a Bonapartist traitor. Quai de Ruse is drunk while the two conspirators set the trap for Dantes, and while he objects to the idea of hurting Dantes, he stays quiet the next day as Dantes is arrested then sentenced even though his testimony could have stopped the entire scandal from happening. Villefort, the deputy crown prosecutor in Marseille, while initially sympathetic to Dantes, destroys the letter from Elba when he discovers that it is addressed to his own father, a Bonapartist. In order to silence Dantes, he condemns him without trial to a life imprisonment. After 6 years of imprisonment in the Carcere d'If, Dantes is on the verge of suicide when he befriends the Abbe copyright Ferrier, a fellow prisoner whom he hears trying to tunnel his way to freedom. Ferrier's calculations on his tunnel were off, and it ends up connecting the two prisoners' cells rather than leading to freedom. Over the course of the next 8 years, Ferrier comes to give Dantes an extensive education in language, culture, and science. He also explains to Dantes how Danglars, Fernand, and Villefort would each have had their own reasons for wanting Dantes in prison. Knowing himself to be close to death, Ferrier tells Dantes the location of a treasure on the island of Monte Cristo. When Ferrier dies, Dantes takes his place in the burial sack, moving the corpse to his own bed through their tunnel. When the guards throw the sack into the sea, Dantes escapes and swims to a nearby island, an extremely difficult feat because of the Car-Centaudiff's isolated location and dangerous offshore currents. No one was known to have escaped the prison and survived. Dantes is rescued by a smuggling ship the next morning. After several months of working with the smugglers, the ship makes a stop at Monte Cristo. Dantes fakes an injury and persuades the smugglers to leave him temporarily on the island while they finish their trip without him. He then makes his way to the hiding place of the treasure. After recovering the treasure, he leaves the smuggling business, buys a yacht, and returns to Marseille, where he begins to find out what became of everyone from his previous life. He later purchases both the island of Monte Cristo and the title of Count from the Tuscan government. Returning to Marseille, Dantes learns that his father died of starvation during his imprisonment, but before embarking on his efforts for revenge, he first helps several people who were kind to him before his imprisonment. Traveling as the Abbe copyright Bisony, he meets Caderousse, now living in poverty, whose intervention might have saved Dantes from prison. Dantes learns that his other enemies have all become wealthy. He gives Caderousse a diamond that can be either a chance to redeem himself, or a trap that will lead to his ruin. Learning that his old employer Morel is on the verge of bankruptcy, Dantes, in the guise of a senior clerk from a banking firm, buys all of Morel's outstanding debts and gives Morel an extension of 3 months to fulfill his obligations. At the end of the 3 months and with no way to repay his debts, Morel is about to commit suicide when he learns that all of his debts have been mysteriously paid and that one of his lost ships has returned with a full cargo, secretly rebuilt and laden by Dantes. Dantes rejoices at the Morel family's joy, then pledges to banish all warm sentiments from his heart and dedicate himself to vengeance. The Count of the Monte Cristo. Returning as the rich Count of the Monte Cristo, Dantes takes revenge on the 3 men responsible for his unjust imprisonment: Fernand, now Count de Morcerf and Mercier copyright Dantes' husband; Danglars, now a baron and a wealthy banker; and Villefort, now Procureur du Roi, all of whom now live in Paris. The Count appears first in Rome, where he becomes acquainted with the Baron Franz d'Épernay, and Viscount Albert de Morcerf, the son of Mercier copyright Dantes and Fernand. Dantes arranges for the young Morcerf to be captured by the bandit Luigi Vampa before rescuing him from Vampa's gang. The Count then moves to Paris, and with Albert de Morcerf's introduction, becomes the sensation of the city. Due to his knowledge and rhetorical power, everyone find him charming and seek his friendship. The Count dazzles the crass Danglars with his seemingly endless wealth, eventually persuading him to extend him a credit of 6 million francs, and withdraws 900,000. Under the terms of the arrangement, the Count can demand access to the remainder at any time. The Count manipulates the bond market, through a false telegraph signal, and quickly destroys a large portion of Danglars' fortune. The rest of it begins to rapidly disappear through mysterious bankruptcies, suspensions of payment, and more bad luck in the stock exchange. Villefort had once conducted an affair with Madame Danglars. She became pregnant and delivered the child in the house that the Count has now purchased. In a desperate attempt to cover up the affair, Villefort told Madame Danglars that the infant had been stillborn. Villefort then smothered the child, and thinking him to be dead, he tried to bury him secretly behind the house. While Villefort was burying the child, he was stabbed by Bertuccio. Bertuccio assumed Villefort was burying treasure. He dug it up, found the near-dead child and brought him back to life. Bertuccio's sister-in-law brought the child up, giving him the name Benedetto. Benedetto takes up a life of crime as he grows into adolescence and spends his time with other young criminals. He decides to rob his adoptive mother and ends up killing her in the process. After that, Benedetto runs away. The Count learns of this story from Bertuccio, who later becomes his servant. He purchases the house and hosts a dinner party there, to which he invites, among others, Villefort and Madame Danglars. During the dinner, the Count announces that, while doing landscaping, he had unearthed a box containing the remains of an infant and had referred the matter to the authorities to investigate. This puzzles Villefort, who knew that the infant's box had been removed and so the Count's story could not be true, and alarms him that perhaps he knows the secret of his past affair with Madame Danglars and may be taunting him. Meanwhile, Benedetto has grown up to become a criminal and is sentenced to the galleys with Caderousse. After the two are freed by Lord Wilmore, Benedetto is sponsored by the Count to take the identity of Viscount Andrea Cavalcanti, and is introduced by him into Parisian society at the same dinner party, with neither Villefort nor Madame Danglars suspecting that Andrea is their presumed dead son. Andrea then ingratiates himself to Danglars, who betroths his daughter Hugo copyright Nye to Andrea after cancelling her engagement to Albert, son of Fernand. Meanwhile, Caderousse blackmails Andrea, threatening to reveal his past. Cornered by Abbe copyright Bisony while attempting to rob the Count's house, Caderousse begs to be given another chance, but Dantes grimly remarks that he had done so twice and Caderousse did not change. He forces Caderousse to write a letter to Danglars exposing Cavalcanti as an impostor and allows Caderousse to leave the house. The moment Caderousse leaves the estate, he is stabbed in the back by Andrea. Caderousse manages to dictate and sign a deathbed statement identifying his killer, and the Count reveals his true identity to Caderousse moments before Caderousse dies. Years before, Ali Pasha, the ruler of Janina, had been betrayed to the Turks by Fernand. After Ali's death, Fernand sold Ali's wife Vasiliki and his daughter Haida copyright into slavery. While Vasiliki died shortly afterwards, Haida copyright was found and bought by Dantes and becomes the Count's ward. The Count manipulates Danglars into researching the event, which is published in a newspaper. As a result, Fernand is brought to trial for his crimes. Haida copyright testifies against him, and Fernand is disgraced. Merker copyright Dantes, still beautiful, is the only person to recognize the Count as Dantes. When Albert blames the Count for his father's downfall and publicly challenges him to a duel, Merker copyright Dantes goes secretly to the Count and begs him to spare her son. During this interview, she learns the truth of his arrest and imprisonment. She later reveals the truth to Albert, which causes Albert to make a public apology to the Count. Albert and Merker copyright Dantes disown Fernand, who is confronted with Dantes' true identity and commits suicide. The mother and son depart to build a new life free of disgrace. Albert enlists as a soldier and goes to Africa in order to rebuild his life and honor under a new name, and Merker copyright Dantes begins a solitary life in Marseille. Valentine, Villefort's daughter by his late first wife, stands to inherit the fortune of her grandfather and of her mother's parents, while Villefort's second wife copyright Losay seeks the fortune for her son Permildoard. The Count is aware of copyright Losay's intentions, and innocently introduces her to the technique of poison. Copyright Losay fatally poisons the Saint Marc copyright Rans, so that Valentine inherits their fortune. Valentine is disinherited by Noirtier in an attempt to prevent Valentine's impending marriage with Franz d'Épernay. The marriage is cancelled when d'Épernay learns that his father was actually killed by Noirtier in a duel. Afterwards, Valentine is reinstated in Noirtier's will. After a failed attempt on Noirtier's life, which instead claims the life of Noirtier's servant Baroy, copyright Losay then targets Valentine so that Permildoard will finally get the fortune. However, Valentine is the prime suspect in her father's eyes in the deaths of the Saint Marc copyright Rans and Baroy. On learning that Morel's son Maximilien is in love with Valentine, the Count saves her by making it appear as though copyright Losay's plan to poison Valentine has succeeded and that Valentine is dead. Villefort learns from Noirtier that her copyright Losay is the real murderer and confronts her, giving her the choice of a public execution or committing suicide by her own poison. Fleeing after Caderousse's letter exposes him, Andrea gets as far as Compiègne before he is arrested and returned to Paris, where Villefort prosecutes him. While in prison awaiting trial, Andrea is visited by Bertuccio, who tells him the truth about his father. At his trial, Andrea reveals that he is Villefort's son and was rescued after Villefort buried him alive. A stunned Villefort admits his guilt and flees the court. He rushes home to stop his wife's suicide but is too late. She has poisoned her son as well. Dantes confronts Villefort, revealing his true identity, but this, combined with the shock of the trial's revelations and the death of his wife and son, drives Villefort insane. Dantes tries to resuscitate a Permille d'Auge but fails, and despairs that his revenge has gone too far. It is only after he revisits his cell in the car Saint-Odif that Dantes is reassured that his cause is just and his conscience is clear, that he can fulfill his plan while being able to forgive both his enemies and himself. After the Count's manipulation of the bond market, Danglars is left with only a destroyed reputation and 5 million francs he has been holding in deposit for hospitals. The Count demands this sum to fulfill their credit agreement, and Danglars embezzles the hospital fund. Abandoning his wife, Danglars flees to Italy with the Count's receipt and 50,000 francs in petty cash, hoping to live in Vienna in anonymous prosperity. While leaving Rome, he is kidnapped by the Count's agent Luigi Vampa and is imprisoned in the same way as Albert. Forced to pay exorbitant prices for food and nearly starved to death, Danglars eventually signs away all of his ill-gotten gains. Dantes anonymously returns the stolen money to the hospitals. Left emaciated, grey-haired and driven nearly mad by his ordeal, Danglars finally repents his crimes. Dantes forgives Danglars and allows him to leave with his freedom and his 50,000 francs. Maximilien Morel, believing Valentine to be dead, contemplates suicide after her funeral. Dantes reveals his true identity and explains that he rescued Morel's father from bankruptcy, disgrace and suicide years earlier. He then tells Maximilien to reconsider his suicide. On the island of Monte Cristo 1 month later, Dantes presents Valentine to Maximilien and reveals the true sequence of events. Having found peace, Dantes leaves the newly reunited couple his fortune and departs for an unknown destination to find comfort and a new life with Haida copyrightee, who has declared her love for him. The reader is left with a final thought: all human wisdom is contained in these two words, wait and hope. Characters. Publication: The Count of Monte Cristo was originally published in the journal Des Darts copyright Bats in 18 parts. Publication ran from August 28, 1844 to January 15, 1846. It was first published in Paris by Par copyright TION in 18 volumes. Complete versions of the novel in the original French were published throughout the 19th century. The most common English translation was originally published in 1846 by Chapman and Hall. Most unabridged English editions of the novel, including the Modern Library and Oxford World's Classics editions, use this translation, although Penguin Classics published a new translation by Robin Buss in 1996. Buss's translation updated the language, is more accessible to modern readers, and restored content that was modified in the 1846 translation because of Victorian English social restrictions to reflect Dumas' original version. Other English translations of the unabridged work exist, but are rarely seen in print and most borrow from the 1846 anonymous translation. Everyman's Library published a revised English translation by Peter Washington in 2009, with an introduction by Umberto Eco. This edition claims to have streamlined the 1846 translation by removing some repetitions and redundancies in Dumas' original text. Alexandre Dumas wrote a set of 3 plays that collectively told the story of the Count of Monte Cristo, Le Comte de Morcerf, and Villefort. The book itself went on to inspire the plot for a wide array of novels, from Lew Wallace's Ben-Hur, a science fiction retelling in Alfred Bester's The Star's My Destination, to Stephen Ferry's contemporary The Star's Tennis Balls. Reception and legacy. The original work was published in serial form in the journal Des Darts copyright Bats in 1844. Carlos Javier Villafane Mercado described the effect in Europe. The effect of the serials, which held vast audiences in Florida, is unlike any experience of reading we are likely to have known ourselves, maybe something like that of a particularly gripping television series. Day after day, at breakfast or at work or on the street, people talked of little else. George Saintsbury stated, Monte Cristo is said to have been at its first appearance, and for some time subsequently, the most popular book in Europe. Perhaps no novel within a given number of years had so many readers and penetrated into so many different countries. This popularity has extended into modern times as well. The book was translated into virtually all modern languages and has never been out of print in most of them. There have been at least 29 motion pictures based on it, as well as several television series, and many movies, have worked the name Monte Cristo into their titles. The title Monte Cristo lives on in a famous gold mine, a line of luxury Cuban cigars, a sandwich, and any number of bars and casinos. It even lurks in the name of the street corner hustle Three Card Monte. Modern Russian writer and philologist Vadim Nikolov determined the Count of Monte Cristo as a mega-polyphonic novel. Historical background: the success of the Monte Cristo coincides with France's Second Empire. In the book, Dumas tells of the 1815 return of Napoleon I, and alludes to contemporary events when the governor at the Castle Saint-Odif is promoted to a position at the Castle of Ham. The attitude of Dumas towards Bonapartism was conflicted. His father, Thomas Alexandre Dumas, a Haitian of mixed descent, became a successful general during the French Revolution. When new racial discrimination laws were applied in 1802, the general was dismissed from the army and became profoundly bitter toward Napoleon. In 1840 the ashes of Napoleon I were brought to France and became an object of veneration in the Church of Les Invalides, renewing popular patriotic support for the Bonaparte family. In Causeries, Dumas published a short paper, a Permeltat civil du Comte de Monte-Cristo, on the genesis of the Count of Monte Cristo. It appears that Dumas had close contacts with members of the Bonaparte family while living in Florence in 1841. In a small boat he sailed around the island of Monte Cristo accompanied by a young prince, a cousin to Louis Bonaparte, who was to become Emperor of France 10 years later. During this trip he promised the prince that he would write a novel with the island's name in the title. At that time the future emperor was imprisoned at the citadel of Ham, a name that is mentioned in the novel. Dumas did visit him there, although he does not mention it in Etat Civil. In 1840 Louis Napoleon was sentenced to life in prison, but escaped in disguise in 1846, while Dumas' novel was a great success. Just in the manner of Dantes, Louis Napoleon reappeared in Paris as a powerful and enigmatic man of the world. In 1848, however, Dumas did not vote for Louis Napoleon. The novel may have contributed, against the will of the writer, to the victory of the future Napoleon III. A chronology of the Count of Monte Cristo and Bonapartism, during the life of Thomas Alexandre Dumas, 1793. Thomas Alexandre Dumas is promoted to the rank of general in the army of the First French Republic. 1794, he disapproves of the revolutionary terror in western France. 1795-97, he becomes famous and fights under Napoleon. 1802, black officers are dismissed from the army. The empire re-establishes slavery. 1802, birth of his son, Alexandre Dumas Paris. 1806, Thomas Alexandre Dumas dies, still bitter about the injustice of the empire. During the life of Alexandre Dumas, 1832 the only son of Napoleon I dies. 1836, Alexandre Dumas is famous as a writer by this time. 1836, first putsch by Louis Napoleon, aged 28, fails. 1840, a law is passed to bring the ashes of Napoleon I to France. 1840, second putsch of Louis Napoleon. He is imprisoned for life and becomes known as the candidate for the imperial succession. 1841, Dumas lives in Florence and becomes acquainted with King Jar copyright Rami and his son, Napoleon copyright on. 1841-44, the story is conceived and written. 1844-46, the story is published in parts in a Parisian magazine. 1846, the novel is published in full and becomes a European bestseller. 1846, Louis Napoleon escapes from his prison. 1848, French Second Republic. Louis Napoleon is elected its first president but Dumas does not vote for him. 1857, Dumas publishes a Permeltat civil du Comte de Monte-Cristo, selected notable adaptations. Film and TV, 1922, Monte Cristo, directed by Emmett J. Flynn, 1934, The Count of the Monte Cristo, directed by Roland B. Lee, 1940, The Son of Monte Cristo, directed by Roland B. Lee, 1942 El Comte de Monte-Cristo, directed by Chano Arueta and starred by Arturo de Carcubdova, 1946, The Return of Monte Cristo, directed by Henry Levin, 1950, The Prince of Revenge, Egyptian movie, directed by Henry Barkat, 1954, El Comte de Monte-Cristo, directed by Lee Kubden-Klimovsky and starred by Jorge Mistral. 1956, The Count of the Monte Cristo, TV series based on further adventures of Edmond Dantes after the end of the novel. 1958, Banjit Kote Valaban, Tamil film adaptation. 1961, Le Comte de Monte Cristo, starring Louis Jourdan, directed by Claude Hortand Lara. 1964, The Count of the Monte Cristo, BBC television serial starring Alan Badal and Natasha Parry. 1964, The Prince of Astuteness, Egyptian movie directed by Henry Barkat, starring Farid Shawki. 1966, Il Conte di Monte-Cristo, RAI Italian television serial directed by Edmond Fenelio. Starring Andrea Giordana. 1968, Sous le signe de Monte Cristo, French movie starring Paul Barge, Claude Jade and Annie Duperret, directed by Andra. Copyright Hunebelle. 1975, The Count of the Monte Cristo, starring Richard Chamberlain, directed by David Green. 1977, The Great Vendetta, Hong Kong television serial starring Adam Cheng, in which the background of the story is changed to southern China during the Republican era. 1984, La Due plus or minus AA 1984 Venezuelan telenovela with a female version of Edmond Dantes. 1986, Vita, Telugu film adaptation. 1988, The Prisoner of Castle If, Soviet miniseries starring Viktor Avilov and Alexei Petrenko, with music and songs of Alexander Gradsky, Garfield and Friends episode The Discount of the Monte Cristo, a retelling of the story using the characters from U.S. Acres as the cast. Aloysius Pig, voiced by comedian Kevin Meaney, tries to cut the cost of the story, even though the characters are using their imaginations. 1998, The Count of the Monte Cristo, television serial starring Gar. Copyright Rad Depardieu. 1999, Forever Mine, film starring Joseph Fiennes, Ray Liotta and Gretchen Mol, loosely but clearly based upon The Count of the Monte Cristo, directed written by Paul Schrader. 2002, The Count of the Monte Cristo, directed by Kevin Reynolds and starring Jim Caviezel and Guy Pearce. 2004, Gankotsu of The Count of the Monte Cristo, Japanese animation adaptation. Produced by Gonzo, directed by Mahiro Maeda. 2006, Vingana Section A, telenovela directed by Rodrigo Ricacubed and Paulo Rosa, SIC Portugal. 2006, Monte Cristo, Argentine telenovela starring Pablo Echari and Palacrum. 2010, Zul, a Turkish television series billed as an adaptation of The Count of the Monte Cristo. 2011, Revenge, a television series billed as an adaptation of The Count of the Monte Cristo. 2012, Avenida Brasil, a Brazilian telenovela starring Dar. Copyright Bora Falabella and Adriana Steves. David S. Gower will direct an adaptation of The Count of the Monte Cristo. Literary adaptations. 1956, The Stars My Destination, Alfred Bester. 2000, The Stars Tennis Balls, Stephen Ferry. 2008, A Prisoner of Birth, Jeffrey Archer. 2008, Master, an erotic version, Colette Gale. 2010, Getting Revenge on Lauren Wood, a YA novel by Eileen Cook, which deals with popularity and bullying. Sequels: 1853, Amar Poundo du Fernando, Alfredo Hogan, 1881, The Son of Monte Cristo, Jules Lamina, 1869, The Countess of the Monte Cristo, Jean-Charles Du Bois, also 1934-1948, 1946, The Wife of the Monte Cristo, 2012, The Sultan of Monte Cristo, first sequel to The Count of the Monte Cristo, The Holy Ghostwriter, plays and musical scripts. The story has been adapted into stage productions since the late 19th century. As early as 1875, James O'Neill, father of playwright Eugene, performed as the Count of the Monte Cristo in a Chicago theater, a role he would reprise over 6,000 times during his career. Following are some more recent stage adaptations. 2000, Monte Cristo by Karel Svoboda and Zdenek Borovec, Prague. 2003, The Count of the Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas and Tatiana Zyryanova, 2005, Monte Cristo by John Smith and Leon Paris, 2008, Monte Cristo by Roman Ignatiev and Yuli Kim, Moscow, 2009, The Count of the Monte Cristo by Frank Wildhorn, 2009, The Count of the Monte Cristo, by Ido Ricklin, 2010, The Count of the Monte Cristo, rock opera by Pete Snedden, 2012, The Count of the Monte Cristo by Richard Bean, Royal National Theatre, 2013, The Count of Monte Cristo produced by Cosmos Troupe of Takarazuka Review, audio adaptations, 1938, Orson Welles and the Mercury Theatre on the Air Players. 1939, Orson Welles with Agnes Moorehead at the Campbell Playhouse, 1939, Robert Montgomery on the Lux Radio Theatre, 1947, Carlton Young, 1960s, Paul Deneman for Tale Spinners for Children's Series UAC 11044, 1961, Louis Jordan for Cademan Records, 1964, Per Extra Paragraph M Director, 1987, Andrew Sachs on BBC Radio 4, 2005, John Lee for Blackstone Audiobooks, 2012. Ian Glenn on BBC Radio 4 written by Sebastian Bachskayevich and directed by Jeremy Mortimer and Sasha Yevtushenko, with Richard Johnson as Ferrier. Jane Lapater as the aged Haydée, Toby Jones as Danglars, Zubin Vala as Fernand, Paul Rees as Villefort and Josette Simon as Mercedes. References. Notes. Further reading, Moroy, Andrew. Copyright The Titans, a three-generation biography of the Dumas. Trans. By Gerard Hopkins. New York, Harper & Brothers Publishers. OCLCA 260126 Shop, Claude. Alexandre Dumas, Genius of Life. Trans. By A. J. Koch. New York, Toronto, Franklin Watts. ISBN A0-531-15093-3 Salian, Jean-Marie. La subversion de la Euro unregistered trademark Orientalisme dans le Comte de Monte-Cristo d'un Euro unregistered trademark Alexandre Dumas, A Permiltudes for Sectionizes, Volume 36, Now Degree 1, 2000, ppA 179 Euro 190, Toesca, Catherine. Les Sept Monte Cristo d'Alexandre Dumas. Paris, Maisonneuve and La Rose. ISBN A2-7068-1613-9. Lenotre, G. La Conquête et la Ragene in Revue des Deux Mondes, Jan-February 1919, Blaise de Berry, H. Alexandre Dumas César Vi, Sun Temps, Sun Over, Maxinelli, Clara. Animato, Carlo. Il Conte di Monte-Cristo o Favola alchimica e massonica vendetta, edizioni mediterranee. ISBN 88-272-0791-0. Car copyright Kiel Raynal, Promenade Mar copyright Dico Pharmaceutique Travers L. Angstrom Uvid d'Alexandre Dumas, in Revue d'Histoire de la Pharmacie, 2002, Volume 90, N333. ppA 111 Euro 146, external links, Critical Approach on the Count of the Monte Cristo by Enrique Javier González Camacho and Gibralfaro, The Journal of Creative Writing and Humanities at the University of Malaga, The Count of the Monte Cristo, full text with embedded audio at publicliterature.org, The Count of the Monte Cristo, an audiobook by LibriVox, available at Internet Archive, Tale Spinners for Children, The Count of the Monte Cristo MP3 download, Pierre Pickard, The Real Count, Count of the Monte Cristo Paris Walking Tour identifies locations from the novel in Paris mapped on Google Maps, The Count of the Monte Cristo on Open Library at the Internet Archive, The Count of the Monte Cristo on BBC Radio 7, The Count of the Monte Cristo on Schmoke.com, The Count of the Monte Cristo on Project Gutenberg.